for your presence this morning. We're so pleased that you could be here with us. On behalf of the panel experts and all of the collaborating organizations, I welcome you to our program, Living Well in Toxic Times, Integrative Self-Care Tools for Fire Recovery and Resilience. Please feel free, fill in the space. Come on up front if you like. My name is Nicole Warwick, and I'm your weaver of context this morning. I'm an environmental health advocate. I work in the areas of education, psychology, and ecology. You may know me from my work on the Series Community Project's Board of Directors, as an expressive arts educator and therapist with the Reach School, as the Family Education Coordinator with the Pioneers Institute, and in this capacity, I have the profound honor and pleasure of coordinating environmental health in Sonoma County with Daily Acts. Sorry, it's visually distracting to have something right in front of your face when you're talking. I didn't anticipate that. Daily Acts is a local nonprofit organization that's committed to sustainability, community, and enriching lives by inspiring positive action. This event is a collaborative effort of many doctors and organizations who also seek to inspire positive action regarding our health. We met regularly for months to discuss our environmental health during and after the fires, and to strategize how we could best approach this subject with our community in a way that we could outreach and provide information that would be empowering instead of fearful. So this event is a reflection of our passions and our compassion for our community, for our earth, for our health, for our well-being. And I'd like to acknowledge the key people and organizations who made this event happen. So as I call your name, will you stand or identify yourself? And if we could just hold applause till the end. Dr. Bonnie Nedrow, Dr. Elisa Liguri Stratton, Dr. Jen Regal, Dr. Chris Holder, Dr. Bridget Grusecki Zumine, Jenny Harrow, Lily Mazzarella, and Kira Epstein. So there are several organizations that helped us pull all this together. Pharmacopoeia obviously has been a great ally, and we'd like to acknowledge them and thank them for their donations of bath salts, for teas, for herbs, just their wonderful presence. Thank you. Kira Epstein's the coordinator of Commonweal's New School, and they support us in co-hosting this, and they've been providing educational and outreach activities for our community since the fires, particularly focusing on grief and resilience. And then we also have Jenny, who's a co-founder with Jen of the Integrative Healers Action Network. They were instrumental. They were the ones behind the scenes in getting acupuncturists, herbalists, massage therapists on the front lines, helping the first responders, helping those who were most impacted by the fires. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank you guys for your hard and dedicated work. Also want to give special thanks to Jenna and the Sebastopol Grange Hall for generously donating this space for our event today. Now, speaking of space, it's been our intention to create a safe space for you, where we can share our expertise in environmental health and medicine while exploring the relationships that exist between our toxic exposure, the trauma we've experienced, our capacity for resilience, and health. In that line, we encourage self-care, which means if you need to move, stretch, lay down, stand at the back of the room, you need to take a bio break, you need a mental health break, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. The snacks and the tea are available to you anytime during this presentation. So if you feel the call to be nourished, please take care of that need. Restrooms are located near the front entrance. The herbal tea, courtesy of Pharmacopoeia, is right over there. And if you hadn't already noticed, the food that was provided by 3 Leaves Foods. So we understand that our community experienced a traumatic event during the fires. And the subject matter of toxics and trauma is relevant, yet maybe emotionally impactful. I know it has been for me. So in the event that you experience any extraordinary stress or a trauma response during this program, we have a psychologist available to support you. Her name is Dr. Lori Pandolfo. Lori, can you identify yourself? She will be available to you at any point in time during this presentation today. Let's see. Oh, a few more logistics. If you could please remember to silence your telephone. That would be great. We are doing a recording of this so that those who are unable to attend in person might be able to access this information online. And then we thought we might be able to share it with our community members in Southern California. So today's scheduled events includes an hour-long panel presentation featuring our 4 doctors. Dr. Bonnie Nedra will discuss environmental toxicants, their health impacts, and why we should care about them. Dr. Elisa Ligori Stratton will discuss common stress reactions following traumatic events, signs to look for emotional distress, and also ways that we can build resilience. Dr. Jen Riegel will discuss what we can do about our toxics exposure and how to naturally detoxify and support our bodies. And Dr. Chris Holder will discuss the impacts of toxics exposure on vulnerable populations and provide pathways for support. Then we'll take a 15-minute break, have some more goodies, transition into breakout sessions. So we're going to have 2 30-minute breakout sessions. There'll be 6 different topics, so you can choose from them, at least 2, right? I'll describe the breakout sessions in a little bit more depth when that time comes so that you can choose which ones you'd like to attend. Also, that might give you a chance to formulate some questions. Maybe something wasn't covered for you that might be covered in a breakout session. And after the breakout session, we'll return to a whole group and we'll have a brief question and answer to address unanswered questions. So when you checked in, you may have noticed that there was a blue 3x5 card on the table, and there's also some in a basket at the back of the room. This is for you to write down any questions that may come to mind during the presentations. I know for myself, the more I learn, the more questions I have. Right? It triggers things in me. And so it's helpful sometimes to write them down. And if we have the opportunity at the end of today's event, we'll have the panel presenters come back and address those questions. All right. Now, logistical matters are settled. We're here. Let's take a moment to settle in. Okay? I invite you to just join me and take a few slow, deep breaths. Feel your feet. Oop. Can you turn one up? That's good. You didn't want to get that relaxed. All right. Feel your feet firmly on the ground and notice the support of the earth beneath you. Continue breathing deeply, slowly. Imagine yourself connected with the earth. Feel this connection and the healing energy of the earth. And allow this healing energy to move through you. This healing energy is our birthright. If you remember, we are designed to heal. Innately, we are resilient beings. Now notice the top of your head and observe the thoughts and actions that carried you to this moment. And give thanks for being here now. Call your energy back to you. trusting that whatever you're thinking about, whatever concerns you carried with you through the door, or any attachments, just trust that they'll still be there when they need you or you need them. And for now, just bring your attention fully here, fully present in this moment. And as you continue breathing, give yourself some appreciation and some self-love for showing up today. It's not always easy showing up for difficult things, and you are here, and that is meaningful. There will be a lot of information shared here today. Trust that you will access the right information you need and carry with you the information and tools that are most applicable for your health and well-being. And if you have space to take in extra info to share for those in your community, I invite you to do that as well. And finally, I offer a few words of advice from someone who works in environmental health. When considering our environmental health and the impacts that we've gone through, it helps to understand that there are both risks and protective factors. This presentation has been designed to outline both the risks and to emphasize, to demonstrate, and to provide for you some opportunities of protective factors. All right. My kids tell me I should never tell jokes, and my students concur that I'm just a very poor joke teller, so I'm gonna spare you the jokes. But I am quite good at weaving little tales that inspire. And I'm so reminded right now in this moment of mycelium. I really love mushrooms. The largest living organism on the planet is not a blue whale. It's mycelium. And if you don't know what mycelium is, it's a fungal network that connects not just mushrooms, but all living things in a forest. Now, the connections that exist underground, the things that we don't see, are often the things that are most potent and most healing. And I just want to remind us of that today. That this mycelial network that exists, it intuits needs. So if there's an organism on one part of the forest, say a tree for example, and it's in deficit, it's in need, right? It's suffering, the mycelial network feels it, it interprets it, it knows it, and it sends relay messages through the mycelial network to other organisms who may be more strong and more resilient and have a little extra to give. And those organisms share their extra nutrients and life force through this mycelial network so that all the beings in the forest have their needs met. And I'd like to think about us in a very similar way. That this collection of people and how we found each other so beautifully and organically, that we're all a part of this resilience, right? This thing that may go unseen, but that really supports our health. And so I invite you to consider yourself part of my mycelial network today and ongoing. Take what you can from this experience. Let it nourish you. And when you go out in the world, let that nourishment spread to others. Right? That's how healing happens. And personally, in regards to stress, this has been a particularly stressful topic for me. Toxics in our environment, especially as a cancer survivor. So for me, I feel inspired and have hope knowing that there are strong allies like this in the community who are willing to give up their time and their love and their passion to share their wisdom and expertise. It makes me feel so much better, right? So thank you. Thank you. In our current environment, the risks, although still fully unknown, include the toxicants released from the structural burns. So when the homes and the buildings burned, all the consumer goods and chemicals that were inside of them burned and entered our environment. We know many of these chemicals are toxic and present significant health risks. The smoke carried these toxicants across the land, deposited them throughout our environment, our farms, our gardens, our schools, our homes, our watershed. Fortunately, there are concerted bioremediation, mycoremediation, there goes mushrooms again, and watershed protection efforts that are happening right now. These are most likely reducing our exposure, but they're not eliminating it. So our reality is that we've been exposed, and we must assume that there continues to be some level of exposure, even low level. But now, it seems overwhelming, but I don't want you to despair, because I want you to think again about this risk and protective benefits, and the fact that we are designed to heal. So take this to heart from a woman who healed from metastatic breast cancer. We can heal and we can thrive amidst environmental risks. So look to nature. Look to our community. Food is medicine. Our herbs are medicines. Let our community and nature remind us how resilient we truly are, that life is innately resilient. And so there are many, many protective factors that we can employ and self-care tools that we can adopt that would help boost our immune system and build resilience. I'm going to let our experts speak more to those. Okay? So to begin the presentations, I invite up Bonnie Nedrow. She's a naturopathic doctor who specializes in environmental medicine, especially related to preconception and pre- and postnatal care and pediatric care. She is licensed in Oregon and California and has published 2 books on detoxification and has an ebook for signature keto cleanse programs. She practices at the River House in Petaluma, at Pharmacopoeia in Santa Rosa, and via remote consultation.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, well, welcome. And it should be on the slide before that, my dear. There we go. Great. So I've talked about this topic a lot with people, and it's overwhelming. I remember when I'm sorry, I have to be in front of the mic, sorry. When I was first learning this material, and the first year was really depressing and overwhelming. And since then, I've developed more skill in embracing the difficult parts of this and in having tools and other people in my community who I can talk to about it, and really looking towards now, how do we engage more? So I'm so thankful that you guys are here. It is a wake-up call, what has happened. And while the fires did expose us and are, as Nicole has pointed out, still exposing us, there were lots of toxicants in our environment before that happened. And so it's time for us to wake up as a community and say, what can we do? And so that's part of what we want to bring to this is little things matter and they make a big difference. So thanks for being here and taking those steps. So today we want to do our best. I forget that I'm doing it here, but actually my friend Jenny needs to move the slide forward, sorry. We're going to get our cues a little bit better down here to educate, to inspire, and to empower. And so that's probably the most important of those pieces, that you walk away feeling that you have some tools, that you have some things to share with other people in the community. So basic information. We're exposed to hundreds of chemical compounds daily. We know that individually there's studies showing that these compounds cause various health effects. We don't really understand how mixing them all together. So there's not a lot of studies that are realistic of the number of chemicals that we're exposed to. There'll be a video clip talking about the roughly 80,000 man-made chemicals that are now in circulation. About 3,000 of those are what we're exposed to on a regular basis, even when we're careful. So there is a big mix, and we don't know even what a dozen do. And so that's some of the unknown. I think that that's one of the things that we just have to accept and embrace is there's a lot we don't know. On the other hand, I went to the Philippines, and I don't say delivered babies because women deliver babies. I caught 82 babies when I was there, with in a very poor hospital with very little. I mean, I can't believe what they wheel out into a delivery suite here in the United States. And the resilience of those babies, and the malnutrition that often was happening, and the crowded living conditions, and these babies just lived. And it's just, life is abundant, and we see that. So that's one of the other unexplainable things, is that life goes on, and we do have a capacity, an innate capacity, to deal with whatever happens. And so that's what we need to, again, go back to when we feel overwhelmed by all the things we can't control, those 3,000 chemicals that we cannot control. So these are the things that are associated with chemicals on board. And the first couple are really looking at building the hardware. And then we kind of get into the software. And so I like to think about that when I think about children being exposed, and parents being exposed before they conceive a baby, and women being exposed during pregnancy, is those are more vulnerable times when we're really building the person. It's always easier for me as an environmental medicine doctor to work with adults who have been exposed, because we remove that exposure through avoidance and reducing the body burden, and those people get better. So we need to think about this next generation, the next generations coming along, and as those being our vulnerable windows, as they are adapting their hardware to the new world that we're creating. So as Nicole was explaining, really the fires moved all those chemicals from those buildings. I mean, if you just think about a Walmart burning up and what is in a Walmart. And so that went into the air, and so that was our first exposure. So if you were in an area where you were exposed to the air, then it settled and compounded in dust. And we don't know what was so volatile that it moved on to other areas and what really condensed and got into the dust. It's still in the dust, so that's one of the things we want to watch for avoidance, is we want to be careful with the dust and not be overexposed to it. And then, of course, it is moving into the water. It's not as wet of a year as we had last year. That's going to impact where these compounds end up. And then it will be moving into the food. So I love the mushrooms also. You know, this is kind of the hope. I love mushrooms like I like flora of all sorts, and they're very fast. So if you think of our probiotics in our bodies, they evolve very quickly. Their lifespans are very short. We're changing the world really rapidly. We evolve very slowly as humans, but we have our mushrooms. We have our flora that is going to be resilient and be protecting us as we move forward. Okay, I have a little video clip to play just to kind of condense everything.
We have 80,000.
80,000 chemicals in commerce.
Companies are free to put a chemical on the market with zero information about its health or safety properties.
You look at some of the things that are on store shelves today and you can't believe it.
We have products on the market and nobody knows if they're safe or not, and nobody's testing it because they don't have to.
I don't want to take the chance of buying something that could be really bad for my family.
Well, that's the gang. Chances are you bought them already.
Almost all of our consumer products are made up of chemicals, and a lot of those chemicals are harmful.
There are different chemicals, are in different levels, and it's getting into us in every conceivable way possible.
And so your body is ground zero in the battle over pollution. That's the fundamental change that's happened.
Toxic chemicals that interfere with reproductive systems, that cause cancers, that interfere with our immune systems, that interfere with development.
These things can all be affected by very small amounts of chemicals.
Well, somehow we have industrial chemicals floating around in our bodies. And you'd think one of those would be enough, but 232 it's kind of hard to say what's going on.
You know, when people start wanting to know about this stuff, when somebody in their family has cancer or learning disability.
People say to me, like, what do we need to fix this system? I say it's simple. Everything.
And the concern should be not just about us, but more importantly about future generations.
In these next 10 to 15 to 20 years, you need to do something about it.
There are choices that people can make.
There are things that we can do about it.
Each one of us can be that beginning today.
The difference between a chance and no chance, the difference between some hope and no hope is a huge difference.
So I like to think of the human body as a barrel. And if you can keep the barrel kind of about to belly button line, then your function is going to be really well. And we all kind of have different levels of where belly button is. Some of us are more sensitive and we have to have lower levels. Some of us are less sensitive and we can tolerate more levels of chemicals. So you have to find, we're not all equal in this barrel, but you find your barrel. And so through avoidance and through some of the things that Jen is going to talk about when she comes up, we want to keep that barrel to a reasonable level. So people get sensitive to chemicals when that starts coming up to the eyebrow level. So if you're walking into Target and you get a headache walking down the aisle, you're at eyebrow level. And then we've got people who are above eyebrow level who are really just laying down flat. And so you want to know where your chemical level is, and then we're going to share some tools for how to lower your barrel so that you can live in this world. We're not going to get rid of all these chemicals right away. We'd love to stop making them, so if anybody's interested in that, that'd be awesome. But in the meanwhile, we want to keep our barrel as clean as we can. So the precautionary principle, and I wish that this was something that was applied to industry as we went along, and it really isn't. As noted in the little clip there is still no law, it comes up to be lobbied every year for the last 9 years, that says that we have to prove a chemical is safe before it gets a patent. So we're still on identifying chemicals we're pretty sure cause harm must be tested. And once they are thoroughly tested in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they are taken off the market. And then unfortunately, often they will take the same type of chemical and replace that chemical with that, knowing that it's going to have the same health risk, but that one has not been banned. So that's the game right now. We need to change the game. We need to move to the precautionary principle. This is especially important for our children. If we think something is going to cause harm, we need to do something about it. So here's, you guys know the vulnerable population, but babies, pregnant women, what people don't think a whole lot about, which I'd love for you to share with people, is during the 3 months before a couple conceives or before an egg and a sperm meet, that is the most vulnerable window. So we actually look at pregnancy as a year long, as 3 months before conception, when those gametes, the eggs and the sperm, are going through their kind of maturation. So they're very active, very vulnerable before they meet. And so this is very important for people to understand this who have been exposed to toxicants, that you want to work on, even when you're feeling very, very healthy as a parent to be, that next generation is vulnerable to very small amounts of exposure. And so those are the people we also need to get that message out to and protect that next generation. If you already have a chronic illness, that's another big group that this can just push, a little bit more chemical exposure can push that forward. So that's another group that should be a little bit more cocooned. So, if you're not feeling sad, overwhelmed, angry, and just like outraged, then I'm not sure that you should be here. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? This is just not okay. Unacceptable levels, and we need to get that message out. And the fire was a wake-up call, and that can catalyze us to move towards saying, hey, we don't really want Roundup sprayed all over Sonoma County. It's not good for that next generation. It's not good for any of us. So I love this from Paul Huck, and it helps me kind of digest this. If you look at the data and you're hopeful, then you're not looking at the data. If you look at people, you really go out there and see what people are doing, who they are, and what's in their heart, and you're not hopeful, then you don't have a pulse. And so that's the dichotomy we're working with here. We are our solution to this problem. But we need to get our heads out of the sand and take action for that to make changes in a quick enough time. Okay, so I'm just reminding you, we're not going to do questions. I'm finishing up now. So if you have questions, please write them down on those little cards. We will do our best sometime today to get everybody's questions answered. So thank you very much, and pass the podium back to Nicole.
So you'll notice right now you're being offered some blue note cards. If you have any lingering questions, please feel free to write them down. They can go in the basket at the back table. Also, as part of our resources and what we brought here today, Landry Purcell is in the back. She represents FACTS. She and I are partners in this project, Families Advocating for Chemical and Toxic Safety. And for about the 6 months prior to the fires, she and I had embarked on this project of researching household toxics and putting together a best practices for reducing and eliminating toxics exposures in our homes. So you can imagine the burden of information I had when the fires happened and then kept burning. And the more houses that burned, the more vulnerable I felt. And that sort of illusion of safety I had created for myself by thinking that I could reduce toxics, I could eat organic, I could do all these self-care. That illusion, that bubble, it kind of burst. And I felt full of despair. So I appreciate you saying, yes, I am mad, and I'm sad, and I'm overwhelmed, and I'm grieving. And that's when I started to really understand that this is not just a toxics issue. This is a mental health issue as well. This impacts our mental well-being. And to address that, we've invited Dr. Elisa Liguori-Stratton. She's a licensed clinical psychologist with a specialty in health psychology. In addition to her PhD from California School of Professional Psychology in Los Angeles, she holds a master's degree from Pepperdine University. She has assisted, in medical and medical psychology investigations at John Wayne Cancer Institute in Santa Monica, California, and at UCLA Medical Center. She's a past instructor in the health education department at Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Santa Rosa. And in addition to her private practice in Santa Rosa, she is currently a psychologist at Spring Lake Village Retirement Community, and as a psychologist and a survivor of the Santa Rosa fires, she is an advisory member at the Wildfire Mental Health Collaborative organized by the Healthcare Foundation, Northern Sonoma County. Thank you. Welcome.
So Jen, maybe I'll just give you a high sign when I'm ready to change. So welcome, I'm so glad to see everyone here today. This is such a pertinent meeting of the minds, if you will, yours and ours all together, to talk about some of these issues and to share some of the information that we have that might be helpful for you. So as Nicole referenced, I am one of the thousands who lost my home in the Santa Rosa firestorm. We were up and out the door, awakened and out the door within 15 minutes, and grabbed just a couple of things, including our beloved teenage son, first and foremost, and he was told to leave his computer behind, which he did. But certainly toxics exposure has been one of many things on my mind ever since. Additionally, I was telling Chris earlier today that my father, my beloved father who passed away a number of years ago, was a cardiologist and an internist, and as he aged, he developed a Parkinson's type syndrome, which he, through much reading and research, he came to the conclusion that that illness was in fact probably at least partially triggered by his exposure to fertilizers and pesticides. He was sort of a gentleman farmer on the side. He was an avid gardener for decades. He was also fond of salads, running, all sorts of exercise. He was a master of well-being. But that pesticide exposure, he became pretty convinced was a factor in his development of that illness. So that has stayed with me ever since he and I discussed that many years ago. So several reasons that I'm here, of course. As a health psychologist, my interest has long been resilience. Who gets sick? Who gets well, and why? And how can we also cope with even chronic illness and do as well as possible? So next slide, Jen, if you would. Thanks. So here's a very general description of resilience. And I like the way that this refers to both human beings and to elements of nature, if you will. So the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. Boy, if that isn't what we've all experienced here, I don't know what is, right? Next slide. Here is a definition of psychological resilience specifically. This is from the American Psych Association. The process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, bouncing back. Isn't that what it's all about? Stressors will always happen. If it's not the fires, we all know, right? It's going to be something else. They're ongoing. And I want to say sending good thoughts and prayers to the families of the psychologist and the director over in Napa County who lost their lives yesterday. Stress is always there for all of us in so many ways. Luckily, we know also that emotional and very often physical resilience is also very, very common. It's ordinary. It's normal to be resilient. We are wired and created to be resilient creatures. Bonnie referenced the amazing resilience of the babies. That is exactly right from my point of view. We are built for resilience. It also does not mean that we don't experience tough emotions. Boy, I can speak to that, and I'm sure many of you can as well. We can be extraordinarily resilient, but that doesn't mean that we don't feel. That's part of a healthy personality. So emotional pain and sadness are common in people who've suffered trauma or great degrees of stress. And resilience is not a trait that we have or don't have. It is learnable, and as beautiful as that, to me, it's teachable, meaning for our children, our grandchildren, resilience is teachable. We can grow more and more resilient as we age. I certainly feel more resilient now as I head towards 60 than I was in my 20s and 30s. Practice makes perfect, right? Hopefully, more perfect, closer. I'm always trying. I'll be trying till I'm gone. But that's the beauty of this work, too, is that we continue to learn, we continue to grow. We only stop when we choose to stop, in my mind. The most resilient and incredible 80 and 90-year-olds and even 100 and over that I see in retirement communities are those who have decided to continue learning. It's a beautiful thing. Next slide. Thank you. I just love this image. I want to be able to do that. That's actually a slide from, I don't know if you can see it, from the University of Colorado Medical School Resilience Program. They are now teaching physicians about resilience. Finally, good. Beautiful. Next slide. That kind of says it, doesn't it? I don't even need to speak to that. Couldn't say it any better. Next slide. I'm going to step now for a few slides. I think I have about 7 slides, but some are quite brief, about very common stress reactions that folks may have been experiencing either themselves or noticed them in loved ones, and just to normalize these. I certainly can check off all sorts of these after the fires and after our escape. So I've broken them down with the VA's help here. This is a beautiful website, the VA National Center for PTSD, and I'll give you the actual link at the end of this. If you want to read more about stress, trauma, and resilience, check out their website. It has pages and pages of public education about these topics. It is rich in information. So looking at emotional aspects of traumatic stress reactions or stress following a really challenging event, here are just some of the emotions one might naturally feel. A lot of us felt an emotional numbing. I'm looking at that fifth one down. During the time of the fires, especially those in close proximity. Emotional numbing is a natural defense when we have so much to try to take in and we can't possibly take in all the implications at one time. We may naturally feel kind of emotionally numbed and we'll take in just what we're able to. So to have that happen is not a terrible, terrible thing. It's an adaptive response. Also difficulty feeling happy or feeling pleasure. Grief. I had some tears, especially over what, the stories I was hearing and reading in the paper, seeing on TV, especially about the children and the elders who were literally carried out of Coffey Park past flames. That made me cry. The loss of my trees has been very difficult for me. They're part of my family on that property. Next slide. Cognitive effects. So cognitions are thoughts, right? So changes to my thinking are really important to be aware of. These are normal changes. Doesn't mean we don't want to do something about them if we notice all these things, but just to normalize them to begin with. So memory impairment. Anybody else have memory impairment following the fires? Woohoo. I did. Decision-making impairment, decreased self-esteem, sometimes feeling like I'm not quite myself. I can't do what I usually do or as efficiently or as well as I typically do things. Very normal. I've heard of many people feeling, thinking back to the guilt on that other slide, some of the self-talk that we might find ourselves using when we're stressed. It's really good to start listening to how we're talking to ourselves because that self-talk is changeable. This is what cognitive therapy is all about. How am I talking to myself and is it helpful? Not just is it true, but is it helpful? So nightmares can show up. Anxiety-related dreams or stress-related dreams are certainly common. Feeling spacey or kind of distant, that's called dissociation in my business. Next slide. Physical or body effects. Look at these. A very popular list here. I could probably check off a whole number of these. That hyperarousal is about our stress response being sort of clicked on, and sometimes it doesn't click off if we keep being exposed to additional stressors. So I'm looking at that one, that first column, increased startle response. But hyperarousal is a really good thing to be aware of. It's almost, people can almost feel like they have a little buzz and they can't settle, like constant muscle tension. So taking steps to really kind of quiet that physical response is very, very important. That can be done through things like breath work, self-relaxation, easy exercise, taking a walk, yoga, all sorts of things. We'll talk a little bit about more of some of those things that we can do. Next slide, please. Thank you. I actually find myself saying this a lot. Really, it's normal. It's okay. There are things we can do. It just made me feel better when I saw this after the fires, right? So truly, don't lose it and sleep over it. Next slide. Interpersonal effects, of course, follow on the heels of individual effects, right? By its very nature. The better I take care of myself, the better I can help my son and my spouse to cope as well, that they can do well. So I can be their cheerleader as I take care of myself. It's very common, for example, to feel more protective of your children or your parents or your spouse, your partner, after something like what we've all experienced here. But there are also some other interpersonal things that are very normal. Next slide. For children and teens in school, just a good little bit of information to me. This comes from the Joplin schools. Remember that incredible tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri, not too long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago? I believe that it hit a school, and incredibly, I believe that all the children survived with the help of their teachers. What a story. Wow. That is one resilient community. This is from a badge. This slide comes from a badge that the teachers and the staffs at the Joplin schools started to wear to help them all keep an eye on the kids. So these are the things that they were monitoring in school after a natural disaster. They were looking at attendance and how much was it dropping. Certainly grades, any unexplained change in academic performance Or class participation, where people sort of drifting, where the kid's not as attentive somehow, where the teenager's falling asleep more, or where they making excuses to leave the classroom more. Were the kids, any of them being sent to the office more because they were having some interpersonal problems or upsets? Was that more common than usual for them? And internalizing or externalizing behavior of any type. So here's just a list of those. Externalizing behaviors we think of as someone acting out their emotional distress as opposed to holding it in. The next slide. One of my self-therapy approaches, my name's a little funny there, but one of my self-therapy approaches after the fires was actually to use my photography. The title of this to me is Antidote, Wetlands, Thanksgiving. I didn't get much time out of Sonoma County after the fires, so the images of burned properties in my neighborhood of so many areas, the smoky air, it stays with you, even in your mind, in your imagination. And when we came across the wetlands on Thanksgiving Day, I just felt like it was truly a breath of fresh air, internally and externally. So this is just one thing that I continue to do to help take care of myself. Next slide. In addition to those normal responses, of course, that can feel uncomfortable or concerning, here we are back to resilience. Resilience, again, is so very common. And these are very frequent and, of course, positive responses. Again, this comes from the VA. So much research we have now from trauma victims, not just warfighters, wounded warriors, sometimes we hear them called, but also people after accidents. Could be trauma after an illness or some other event in the family. But look at some of these. Sense of excitement and increased self-worth, that is not a bad thing. The power of potential to reinvent. Boy, we've been using this a lot in our house. This is an opportunity for us to reinvent. We feel unburdened of our things in our house. None of us want to go back to having as many things as we had. It's a relief. I literally do not have to clean as much. That's a really good thing to me. That's liberating. We do feel a sense of liberation in living more simply and more, to me, more in tune with nature. I love this. I would never have chosen it this way, but it is truly an opportunity to me. And there's very often not only that, basic relief and survival, but these other feelings that come alongside. Next slide. We can encourage our own resilience and that of others in any number of ways, and I'll be talking later in the breakout group about some more specific things that are resilience related that we can do. A lot of this is stress management. So I want to take a minute here and just say one of the things we know about stress, and it could be stress related to toxic exposure, certainly. There actually have been studies in looking at people who are aware that they may have been exposed to toxic chemicals. And one of the factors in how they do long term is how well they manage the stress of that knowledge. How about that? What we do with our knowledge, what we do with it emotionally in our thinking and in our behaviors has a whole lot to do with how we do long term. So good stress management is crucial. And like resilience, stress management is an element of resilience, of course, and it is very, very learnable. So some of the cognitive and behavioral aspects of resilience: looking at our self-talk, maintaining a hopeful outlook, avoiding seeing crises as insurmountable problems, setting realistic goals, in a sense taking the small view and the long view. Over the course of my life, how do I want to make this story play out? What story do I want to continue to write in my own life about what's happened? What small steps do I want to take just for today? Next slide. And here's when to start thinking, it's time for me to get some help. Certainly, if any time that what we're doing is not working, it never hurts to start asking some questions, going online, doing some education, talking to our doctors or our practitioners about maybe it's time for me to get a little extra assistance. These are some of the more severe symptoms that one might come across. I'm hearing a number of comments about folks out in the community who are isolating terribly, like they can't go out the door, or they're still avoiding Even if they would normally drive through Fountain Grove or Coffee Park, they can't bear to go through, and we're almost 4 months out. So some of that's starting to get my attention as a psychologist. We want people to feel free to discuss and ask for assistance with this because it is really, really treatable. So extreme avoidance, hyperarousal, those nightmares, panic episodes, okay? Feeling super disconnected. So these are treatable things. Next slide. Here are some local resources. This is a very brief list. On the table in the back, by the door, is a rich list of mental health resources. I encourage you to grab that. We will, I believe, post that same list on Daily Act's website. Thanks, Nicole. All across the county, there are links and resources available. Next slide. And these are just a few other things. There are actually apps that you can put on your phone. Calm is one that many people like for meditation purposes or for self-soothing, for breath work. That's a great and immediate way to lower our stress state, is to change our breathing. PTSD Coach is quite a well-known one. There's also one for families, mindfulness work. And here are some of those websites I referenced. I will put these up. I have a Facebook page at the moment. I'll put some of these up on my Facebook page as well in the next couple of weeks. I'll just start listing these. And next slide. Another one of my photos is Self-Care Matters. So I say go bravely, keep asking questions, stay with us. We're all doing this together and we'll make our way through it. And my goal is, I've been sharing this with a few people, my personal goal is that Sonoma County become the most savvy county in the United States around mental health and well-being after a catastrophe. So we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. LeCurry. Again, questions. If you have questions, thoughts, loose ends you want to tie up in your mind. So our next speaker is going to talk to us about the very, the basics of reducing exposure and what we can do to support our health and build our immunity and resilience. Dr. Jen Riegel is a naturopathic doctor in Santa Rosa at Wild Oak Medicine. She specializes in women's and family health, fertility, and environmental medicine. During the fires, she was part of initiating integrative care at the evacuation centers and is currently collaborating to develop an integrated practitioners network to respond to crises. Today, she will discuss the need for depuration and self-care tools for natural detoxification.
Thank you, Nicole. And I just want to say, before I start real quick, Nicole got a chance to thank everyone else for their participation, but she has just been incredible, and I would love for us all to give her a hand. Thank you for everything that you've done. Really, really appreciate it. You're a master coordinator and weaver of all of this. So I too am going to try and figure out how to get this. There we go. Okay, so I will be covering the basics of what you can do yourself without a lot of extra guidance other than what you'll receive here to help your body to undergo that natural process of eliminating toxins. Dr. Holder is going to cover kind of the more advanced stuff, and so I'm not going to cover any of that. But this should all be things that you can take away from today. So if you go back to what Dr. Bonnie said regarding that barrel, we all had toxic exposure before any of the fires started. And we continue to have that exposure from things other than fire exposure. One of the things that is most important to remember is that there are numerous ways that we can reduce our exposure. There's a lot of things that we cannot control in our environment, but there are a lot of things that we can control. So any exposure that you can stop from toxins in your life will help you overall to reduce that barrel level, if you will. As you reduce that level of chemical exposure, you will start to see symptoms often disappear from the exposure to chemicals. So plastics are a big thing. I think Dr. Bonnie also mentioned a lot of times what happens is that when a chemical is banned or it becomes public knowledge that is not good for you, they'll replace it with one that is just as toxic but is not known. So a really good example with plastics is BPA. So now there's all of these plastic BPA-free bottles, and unfortunately, they have been replaced with another type of bisphenol that is just as or more toxic to your body. And so it's a little bit of a trick that is used often. So awareness around those things is really important. One of the big things you can do is keep your shoes outside or just as you enter your home. Don't track them through your house. The dust that we are exposed to outside carries a lot of those chemicals. We track them through our homes, and that's especially important for our children, especially little kids close to the ground. They get a lot more. Avoiding cigarette smoke, keeping your fruits and vegetables organic when possible. There's a list called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 by the Environmental Working Group. And they help us determine if you can't get all of your vegetables organic, we all know it's pretty expensive sometimes, which ones are most important to get organic. And so the Environmental Working Group, they're a wonderful resource, and I will post that resource as well, and we'll make sure that you have that. Check what you're putting on your body. So that includes cosmetics, lotions, soaps that you use. Our skin, and we'll talk a little bit about this, our skin is one of our main areas that we both take toxins into our body and that we can excrete them. Our skin is a huge organ, and we can excrete most chemicals properly through our skin and through sweating. HEPA filters can be really helpful. I'm going to talk a little bit more about respiratory health in my breakout session, especially for if you're having any respiratory issues. We know from past chemical exposures, things like that had a lot of research, like the World Trade Center, respiratory issues and long-term cancer outcomes are two of the main things we know are affected by chemical exposures like this. So these are just a couple of different ways that we can look at when you're eating and drinking. Avoid plastics, aluminum, copper, Teflon. Try and choose organic. For breathing, if you know you're being exposed, and that includes to dust when you're working on things or when you're in an environment. All of us during the fires were encouraged to use N95 masks. Also, when you're thinking about things like painting or dust particles, things like that, when you're sanding. Then skin, this big thing with skin again that I think is often forgotten, that we can have a lot of exposure through our skin, and our skin is also a great detoxification organ. So a lot of us have heard about the liver being one of our main detoxification organs. So what happens in the liver, and I think Dr. Holder is going to talk a little bit about this too, but is there are two phases of detoxification in the liver. So in the first phase, there are a set of enzymes that are responsible for that, and then a completely different set of enzymes that are responsible for phase 2. We need the nutrients that are cofactors for those enzymes to be available to help us detoxify. Sometimes what can happen is that you'll have what you need for phase 1, and then you won't have what you need in your body for phase 2. Then some of these chemicals can get stuck in this intermediary phase where they actually can be more dangerous sometimes than if they were just left in the body. So we're going to teach you a little bit with diet, and one of the things I like to recommend is an organic, when possible, whole foods diet with lots of phytonutrients in it. That will have most of what your body needs naturally to help you excrete. Okay, so here is some of our top routes of elimination. So sweat, big one, stool, urination, lymphatics. So there are other routes of elimination as well. For example, women, when they menstruate, you lose toxins in your blood and then you recreate. All of the places where we excrete something, we're usually losing some toxins as well. But these are the main ones that we can focus on. So what I want to make sure that you're able to come out of from this piece of it today is knowing how to optimize these, how to get toxins out through these routes. So here's the skin. So one of the best ways that you can get toxins out is through sauna. There are certainly things that certain people, and I think Dr. Holder will be talking about some of the vulnerable populations, but as far as sauna, if you have a complex illness, talk to your doctor first about how to do this safely. But most of us can sweat properly without a lot of risk as long as you're doing it carefully and listening to your body. So use electrolyte replacements. If you are pregnant or breastfeeding, it's not a good time to sauna. And it's also not a good time to be releasing toxins into the body. Because what happens when we are detoxifying our bodies is things will come out of tissues and then they will be excreted. So for a short time, there's an exposure and then it comes out. So when you're pregnant or breastfeeding, or even if you're not and you're thinking, why did I have this intense reaction when I started to sauna, for example? Sometimes that can be because all of the toxins are coming into the bloodstream to be pushed out. A lot of times when that happens, you just need some support. So getting a practitioner on your side who can help you walk you through that. As far as exercise is helpful not just because we sweat, but also because it increases our fat burning where a lot of the toxins are stored, and also because it increases the circulation in our bodies. That will help to remove toxins as well, and it'll increase the metabolism. In our urine, so one of the things that we need to be really careful about now is drinking clean water. I definitely recommend a water filtration system in your home. There are lots of different types out there. It can be more specifically guided if you decide to get your water tested, of course, but hopefully soon we'll also have some reports coming out about what's commonly in our water supply now, and that's changed a bit. And we can add some guidance onto what types of filters are most appropriate. So this is kind of my guide. Everyone is different, but when people ask me how much water should I be drinking, half of your body weight in ounces per day. So if you were 150 pounds, 75 ounces of water a day. You will need more if you decide to sauna or sweat, or if you're exercising. That's base level. Minerals, so you need proper minerals to be excreting properly. And there are a couple of foods that help to detoxify through increasing the urination. So celery, parsley, nettles, lots more. These are called diuretics. All right, so I had a friend recently who was talking about her life hacks on one of the, she wrote a blog, I forget what for, but one of the things she said, and I totally agree with her, is poop. You have to make sure you're pooping. You just have to, because this is how we're getting toxins out. And so if you have constipation, or if your bowel movements are not well formed, it's a time to get help for that. So the correction of diarrhea, constipation, gas, bloating, abdominal pain, it's really helpful in just making sure that all of those toxins that you're mobilizing are able to get out. So what happens if you're not pooping properly is that those toxins will come up from your liver, your body will take care of that, and then they'll sit sometimes if you're constipated, and they'll just be reabsorbed. So how often you're supposed to be going is a little bit different for each person, but daily is good. So, and then for optimization, adding fiber, whole fruits and vegetables, beans and legumes. There are of course things that you can add for fiber as well, but you can certainly do this through a dietary recommendations through lots of fiber in your food. And removing food allergens, those can a lot of times cause gastrointestinal distress and cause the GI tract to not work as well. Herbal bitters are a wonderful way to improve and a lot of these different problems on the left here. Probiotics, we had some samples over there. I don't know if they're gone yet, from an awesome company. And if you have any more serious GI issues, definitely see a doctor and see if you can start getting those corrected. The bottom slide, or the bottom part of that last slide there, is just a note about the microbiome. I put it in big green letters because more and more we find out about the microbiome, which is the bacteria and, well, the gut microbiome is the bacteria in our gut. The more we know that it is incredibly important to our overall well-being. It's important for our immune system, it's important for our inflammation, it's important for our detoxification and for creating the vitamins that we need from our food. Very, very important. Dietary recommendations. So these are the basic dietary recommendations. Lots of color, organic, whole foods. So there's a diet that I often recommend. There's lots of diets out there, but one that I really like is the Whole30 diet. It is a whole foods diet with tons of resources, and that's one of the reasons I love to recommend it, is there's books, there's online resources, there's lots available so that you can really get through it in a good way. So specific foods, a lot of times I get this question a lot, to help eliminate toxins. Brassica vegetables, so broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, beets, burdock root, lemon. And then how I like to make meals like very interesting is through lots of herbal medicine, herbs, turmeric, rosemary, ginger, cinnamon, all sorts of things that you can add. So here's some whole body tricks. So what we have on the bottom right here is a picture. And this shows some main concentrations of lymph nodes of the lymphatic system. On the top is a lymph brush or a dry skin brush. This is really helpful, excuse me, as well in detoxifying the body. The lymphatics really help to gather that and to flush it out of the body. So dry skin brushing, there are lots of videos online. I don't necessarily have time to show you today, but there's lots of videos online as to which direction to go for dry skin brushing, or a practitioner could help you. And then exercise and alternating hot and cold water. That one's called contrast hydrotherapy, and it helps your body vessels work as a pump. So in with the good, out with the bad, basically. So hot and cold. And then there's just some really important pieces that I think we've definitely talked a lot about today, but sleeping, laughing, community support, deep breathing, all really important to help our bodies excrete. When we're in that calm and supported state, our bodies function much better. And so if you're going into a process of wanting to help your body detoxify, definitely please keep these things in mind. Set some time aside for self-care for yourself. I just wanted to, I was thinking about this today. There's a place that Dr. Holder and I go every year. It's called Body Mind Restoration Retreats, and we go and kind of do a raw foods detoxification there every year. And this last year, before the fires, we were sitting in the sauna. We do a lot of saunaing there. And someone asked me about when I was 12 years old, my house burned down and we lost our home. And their comment was, that must have been a really traumatic experience. And it made me stop, and I was like, oh yeah, thinking back, that was a traumatic experience. Of course it was. I had a lot of trauma from that as a 12-year-old, and continue to have things come up during these fires. But what my main sentiment was when that person asked me was, what I actually mostly took from that, some 15, 20 years later, is the community. It was the first time that I learned as a 12-year-old in a really big way how important community was, and how community has the capacity to provide the support that we need, and to give us something that we really can't get anywhere else, to give us that place to land and that support that makes us resilient, that helps to make us very resilient beings. And so I just want to say that this community, the way this community has come together has been so beautiful and brilliant. And my hope is that when we look 20 years down the line, that's the main experience that we take away from this. That the community resilience and the community support is some of the most important things that we can treasure in our experience. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Regal. I want to follow up on that. The nutrition piece is super important, and so is, I was reminded when you were speaking that there are these longevity studies of communities that have experienced catastrophes due to climate change, which I would say that's what we experience. And the trajectories show that for those communities that were able to transition or to gather, to spend time together, their trajectory actually looked like post-traumatic growth instead of post-traumatic stress or atrophy. And so there really is something very juicy and resilient about our community that helps us move forward and through these things together. And in that light, in our community here, we have the Series Community Project. They provide free and low-cost meals to families who are going through a health crisis. These are organic meals. They're prepared by volunteers, youth in our community who grow the food, prepare the food, package it up. Delivery angels will bring it to a family's home. It's an amazing organization. So if you are someone who is experiencing a vulnerable health situation, they are available for you. And if you are also someone whose family was impacted by the fires, they have a program to provide meals for those families who were impacted by the fires. There's flyers about it on the back table. If you have any other questions, let me know, or you can just look it up online, okay? Our next speaker is Dr. Chris Holder. He's a naturopathic physician with a special interest in the treatment and prevention of breast cancer. He put together the Bay Area Breast Health Collective, a prevention-oriented collective to prevent breast cancer. He offers a wide array of treatment options in his practice. Today he's going to be discussing toxic exposures and vulnerable populations.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. I think I'm going to take this off as well. I'm much more relaxed walking around. I'm going to tell you guys a little story about my first awakening, which happened when I was much younger, about toxins. And it came in a very weird place. It came in an HR department. So the 2 years prior, I was working as a work-study student in a research lab that did genetics and also cancer research. And this was back in the 90s up in Seattle, before right around when those big tech booms were happening. There was stupid money all around to do all kinds of research, all kinds of genetic stuff. And so they were hiring us before we even graduated. So I started working when I was 19 in a research lab. 2 years later, they hired me as a staff scientist, and I was sitting with HR filling out all the paperwork. And they gave me some insurance forms to sign. And so I looked at the fine print and said, whoa, $750,000 worth of insurance that they were insuring me. And I said, wow, this is a lot. My family would probably off me themselves if they knew. And then the HR director said, oh yeah, and we've also taken out a policy on you. And I said, for how much? And she said, another $750,000. And I said, why are you guys insuring me so much? And she said, well, you're working with some of the most toxic stuff on the planet. And I never really thought of it that way. Yeah, we used all this protective equipment and had hoods and things like that. But now when I look back on it, all these chemicals that we study in cancer, they're in products that we use each day. But to study cancer, we give these chemicals to cells. We give it to rats, we give it to rabbits, monkeys, and humans inadvertently. and then we go back and study it. But to even study to even make those cells cancerous, we're oftentimes using these same chemicals. And also viruses and all kinds of things like that. So she just pointed out to me what was obvious. I'd been in that environment for 2 years already, that you're in a place where everyone around you is working with viruses, we're all working with chemicals, and there's an 11 Tesla magnet under you. And so that was my awakening. From that point on, it kind of bothered me a little bit. I said, they thought the risk of me dying was high enough to insure me pretty high. And so it was that point that really got driven home to me, that chemicals are all around us and I'm working with them. I eventually did get sick, and because I was so aware of it, I left that job and eventually found a naturopath that helped me detoxify my body and recover. And I decided to do that rather than becoming a medical doctor. So that's kind of how I ended up here and why I'm so interested in genetics and in toxicology was from my lab days. Go ahead and advance that slide. So some of us, it is not safe to get these things out on our own. If you've had cancer or at high risk of getting cancer because you might have genetics, that's a population where you might want to work with a professional to help get things out of you. There's more and more data on diabetes. That was the section of the lab that I worked in with diabetes. There are both genetics and chemicals that trigger diabetes to happen. There are some differences in the way the body detoxifies if you have diabetes. And so that population would also want to work with a medical practitioner. Neurological conditions, there's lots of evidence for almost every neurological disease out there that it is chemically linked, whether we're talking Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADHD, autism. There are classes of chemicals that are linked to all of those. If you already have one of those things that I rattled off or something in that area, you'd also want to work with somebody that specializes in this. And we're actually really lucky to have Dr. Nedra in our community. She was kind of one of the pioneers in our profession, if you will. I never actually directly worked under her or trained with her, but I do consider her to be a mentor in that realm, so we're very lucky to have her here. She truly is very knowledgeable in this. Liver disorders. Your liver is one of your main organs of detoxification. Like Dr. Regal said, it's packaging these fat-soluble toxins and then sending it out through the bile into the urine and into the stool to get out of there. If your liver is tied up because you have Hep C or some other liver condition, you might want to talk with somebody about that. I'll also throw this under that section too. Sometimes if you've been on a pharmaceutical long term, those pharmaceuticals can tie up some of the enzyme systems in the liver. And so in those cases, you may also want to consult with somebody about that because your liver might need a little more help because it's been taxed by that already. Poor kidney function, for sure. You can further damage the kidneys by pushing toxins through it at a fast rate. So this is definitely a population where more testing is involved to monitor how the kidneys are doing, and then also looking at what may be coming out, and there are different ways to protect the kidney from that. High chemical exposures, that's me working in that lab. That's going to be our first responders, the folks picking through the rubble, firefighters. And then if you just happen to be in high proximity, I do have some folks that eventually consulted me because they went back and tried to wait it out to save their houses. Often they got sicker because they got exposed more because they stayed very close. I don't recommend that. But if you did have a high exposure from that, you might want to talk with somebody. Chemical sensitivities. We have a lot of patients that are chemically sensitive. These are the people that walking into Macy's, they immediately feel sick, they immediately get a headache. Those patients at our clinic were told immediately the next day after the fire to get out of this area because they already have a compromised ability to detox. Thanks to the genetics revolution, we now know that a lot of people have problems detoxifying. And one of the things I'm looking at is how much of a role does that play in getting cancer. It's something that hasn't been carefully looked at. They mostly look at cellular growth genes in cancer. Very few researchers are looking at how much your ability to detox plays a role in that. So that's one of the things that I'm up to here in the county. And then definitely anyone thinking of becoming pregnant, you'll want to talk about and possibly work with somebody in terms of getting this stuff out before you conceive. Next slide. Practitioners that are specifically trained in this are going to be your functional medicine doctors, naturopathic doctors, some toxicologists, although most toxicologists don't see patients. They study this in laboratories, or they study patient populations with data that's already been gathered by somebody else. But sometimes it's me calling toxicologists, like if I find a chemical that I don't really know about, I'll look in the medical literature and see, who's the expert on this particular chemical, and I'll oftentimes call them or call a toxicologist and discuss the case with them. So sometimes for advanced topics, we consult toxicologists for that. Supportive help. These are folks that I sometimes refer to when we need extra help because we might need a very complicated program to get these out of you. So there are people that do lymphatic drainage. There's some excellent people in the community here. There are colon hydrotherapists. So sometimes going back to what Dr. Riegel was saying about keeping your bowels moving, that's where a bulk of this is coming out, is in your stools. And if you're slower than normal, I might turn around and say, let's just keep flushing this for the time being, especially if you're dumping a lot of stuff at the time. For folks that need help with nutrition, we often use nutritionists to help make that dietary change to a more whole foods diet. It can be tricky if we haven't been doing that before. Or for some folks, they just have lost those skills for cooking. I tell my patients, eat parsnips, eat rutabaga, eat celery root, and they look at me like, I don't know what to do with that. You're giving me a look. Oh, okay, perfect, we'll talk. So sometimes learning how to combine these things in tasty ways are part of it. Acupuncture is wonderful for both calming the body, calming the mind, and also can play a role in stimulating detoxification systems in the body. Massage, most of us know about this. There's some really talented people in this community. Mental health professionals, if you need to detox your mind. So we already had that talked about. Next slide. I love this slide. It made me laugh. We're not going to dive into too deeply in how this works. We'll save that for another time. Next slide. But I want you guys to know that for back when I worked in the genetics world, to do one gene took a lot of time, and it took a lot of this is all done by computers and lasers and machines now. Back when I was in this world, it was me reading how the gene came out, and it took a long time because I'm much slower than a computer. So now I see this for $200. You can get these genetic printouts done, and some of you are nodding. Some of you might have had this done through 23andMe and then had it analyzed with aftermarket software. So with some of my patients or some advanced cases, we look at these pieces. This is actually one of my patients. We'll call him Bubba. He was a young man that had very extreme bipolar disorder that was sent to me, and I ended up running toxicology tests on him that were extremely high, and he never worked in any industry. So I went back and looked at his genetics and said, oh my goodness, this guy can't excrete anything. On this right-hand column with the colors, the ones that are in green, it's like a traffic light. Those are normal genetics. Yellow means there's a single gene mutation, and the red means there's a double mutation on that gene. So he had a lot of compromised pathways. I see this a lot with patients with cancer, patients with neurological disorders, or especially patients that are brought to me that are young, like women in their 30s with breast cancer. I've treated a few soldiers that got early onset Parkinson's in their 30s. I go back and look at their genetics to see what was going on with their detoxification pathways to help treat their case. So a lot of times folks with genetic issues, we have to further support them with high amounts of certain nutrients. And depending on where the problem is in the gene, that changes which nutrients used. Go ahead, next slide. We can now do a lot of toxicology testing. The price has dropped quite a bit. Back when I first entered medicine 10 years ago, it was pretty expensive. And so I only did this with pretty wealthy populations. Now, pretty much if you're brought to me and you have cancer or you have a neurological disease, I'm going to most likely toxicology test you and see if we can figure out what the main culprits were. Testing isn't perfect. There's only a small number of things that we can test for, and as I mentioned, there's 80,000 chemicals out in the environment. So oftentimes what the tests are about the most common ones or the ones that have the most research behind it. Oftentimes, just liver and kidney function testing might be needed if we're worried about how your detoxification is. So those are things that general doctors and nurse practitioners can order. So looking at liver and kidney function chemistry prior. I did end up treating a lot of folks that were very close in their exposure to burning pesticides, plastics, petroleums, and metals from the fire. Prior to that, I also worked with a lot of Boeing workers that made the 787. A lot of them that got sick, when we went and looked back at their genetics, it was more like they genetically should have never been making that airplane because they don't excrete well. And so for some of those folks, I tell them, you need to find a new profession because you're going to spend a fortune trying to get this out of you if you keep working in this environment. So some of us are kind of canaries, and we wanted to make sure that we brought this up, that some of you might also be canaries and you might want to get your genetics looked at with somebody or have testing done. Okay, next slide. Well, this is our little liver. It's complaining because now it's getting trendy. So again, like Dr. Regal said, there are phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. There are nutrients down there at the bottom. Sometimes we'll end up prescribing high levels of this to make something come out faster. When doing it this way, you want to possibly think about working with somebody because you can make things come out too fast and get sick if the body isn't able to fully package it up and escort it out. Next slide. And I just wanted to say a thank you to all our first responders. They did such an amazing job. Nicole and Daily Acts organized this event. I'm not a good organizer. You can talk to them about that. So it's nice having amazing people doing this so that we can just get up and share our knowledge. There were a number of volunteer practitioners during the fires that staffed all the shelters, everything, that have been unrecognized for the most part and donated a lot of time. So be sure to thank them when you get there. Thank you so much.
One question I'm getting that's common is, can I send you an email with the PowerPoint presentations? Yes, we can do that. If you signed up if you registered, I already have your email. If you didn't register and you signed up and you included your email, I'll add you to the database and make sure that you also get the information. In addition to sending you the PowerPoints, I'm happy to also send you some of the handouts that the physicians have developed for today's event. And then you'll have that available as well, including the list of mental health providers. Thank you. Yes.
Is there going to be any follow-up, any way for us to stay in touch? Anything else coming up? Any way for us to continue knowing what's going on in these areas?
That's a great question. So Debbie just asked if there's a follow-up to this presentation or any way that we continue to gather as a community and address these issues. I like that. And yes, we should do that. What that would look like right now, I don't know, but I'm going to connect with our panelists and see. It sounds like a worthy thing to be able to continue to do. Okay? One question that came up that I can address here had to do with soil health. What can we do for our former organic gardens? The recommendations that have been made in regard to soil health are to do everything that you can to boost living, biodynamic, living soil. Let me say it again, living soil, right? So don't go out to your homes and spray with a bunch of Roundup or chemicals because those things are killing the bioorganisms in your soil. We need soil, and soil, very bioactive soil, naturally bioremediates heavy metals from the soil, from the dirt. So inoculating your soil with humus or mycelium is a great way to go. Adding vermicompost, another great way to go. Do the things that you know that boosts immunity and support from the ground up. From the soil to the water, you can purify your water with very simple purification devices, tabletop purification devices. Questions to the panel. What would help those who suffer physical and severe brain injuries? Noting increased sensitivity to external stimuli, anger outbursts. Are there any specific therapies that could be recommended?
I might be best suited to speak to this because I had a career-ending brain injury that ended all my sports, and it was kind of a long road back. There's a lot of research being done on this because of the awareness in the NFL right now with CTE. And so there's a lot of data coming out on what to do with concussions and subconcussive hits, where you don't have a full-on concussion, but you did get some shearing of your neurons in your brain. One of the things that I usually send a lot of these patients to is the sensory deprivation tanks where you float in magnesium salts and you turn off the lights. There's one in Sebastopol. I'm not sure if there's one in Santa Rosa, but that tends to be very deeply healing for the brain to just further desensitize it. There's a number of things that you can do to help the brain repair. Things like B12 and omega-3 fats are required for that repair process.
This question, I think, came up for me too, actually. This past winter, we seem to have one of the worst seasons of colds and flus. Do you believe that this was due to compromised immune systems related to the fires?
Short answer is absolutely yes. So when we look at what happens when we're exposed to chemicals, there's three systems that we think of as being the most vulnerable. The immune system, the reproductive system, and the neurological system. So the immune system is really a very superficial response, and so is usually the first system that we start to see symptoms in when a person's barrel is filling up and they're not able to cope. So if you're dealing with a bunch of toxicants and your immune system is suppressed and diverted, then you throw in some viruses on top of that and your resilience is down. Certainly if there's stress involved, so if you know, for people who lost their homes or had family members who lost their homes and they moved in with them, you know, we have a lot of situations that add some additional stress, and a person's in their flight and fright, that suppresses the immune system acutely. So if it's chronic stress, then during that whole time, then the immune system is going to be knocked down. The crowded living situations is another issue within that, so we're just closer. So we know things like whooping cough is much worse for people who live, a lot of people in a small space. And so that is another contributor. So we've got a bunch of contributing factors that would make sense that we would have a harder time recovering and having deeper infections. And then in Chinese medicine, the last one I will mention is really the lungs are the seat of grief and sorrow. And so things can go into the lungs when there's a big loss. And even if you didn't have a personal loss, we had such a big community loss that that's a place that could settle that it wouldn't normally settle in.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll close for today. This one's about accessibility to care. How can people, poor people, access this type of care?
Thanks for that question. I think that's a really good question. It's hard because I'm coming from Washington, where there right now we have the capacity as naturopathic doctors to be reimbursed by the Medicaid system there. It's not the case here in California, unfortunately. And actually, Dr. Holder is the incoming president for the CNDA, the Naturopathic Doctors Association in California, and one of the main goals of ours is to allow us to be able to have at least reimbursement by insurance companies for our patients. And so just that being a side note, we are working on it because we recognize the difficulties sometimes for being able to access this type of care. That being said, there are some spaces for community health in these respects. Sometimes functional medicine doctors as well will take insurance, and that can be an access to care. We've been talking for a while now about when we open a new space to have days where we can do ask the doctor type of sessions where we can have multiple people come in, smaller groups than this, but be able to access care for a very low fee. Excuse me. There are certainly talks like this, and we'll continue to do this for the community to be able to access care, and then, you know, kind of free game after this type of thing for maybe 10-15 minutes before we have to clean up, to be able to ask some questions as well and get some basic things answered. I'm sorry that I don't have a perfect answer to that question here in California yet, and I wish that I did, and we continue to work on it. But there are definitely certain places in the community, and we can work on providing a resource list for that as well for low-income costs and care for this type of medicine, and clinics we continue to put on. So we try and keep resources up to date as far as clinics that we're holding. We'll try and stay in contact with everyone here about things that we continue to do in this respect. And do you guys have any other thoughts and resources?
I would say one of the things that I found, I moved here from Ashland, Oregon last year, and they had a thing called Mama's Medicine Wheel, and I bet there's something like that here where people weren't necessarily able to come in and see me for care, but they had friends who saw me for care, and then they disseminated information, kind of like what we used to do, you know, Grandma. And so if there's some sort of online where people do communicate and share resources, what you learn here today, you can share with other people. So that's one way we can spread this, is spread it as a community. That's how medicine has always been done. It doesn't need to be done behind closed doors.
So yeah, I am on the naturopathic board right now, and I'm about to become the president. And when we approached when the Affordable Care Act was happening, naturopathic medicine actually got written into it. but the insurance commissioner in California is not upholding the law the way it's written. And so that's the real reason why we can't do that. So number one, complain to the insurance commissioner and say that you want to get this reimbursed. That's number one, really, because when we finally approached the insurance commissioner, he said, well, nobody's complaining. And so, that would be the first thing, start calling. The second thing, I was literally just in Sacramento last week speaking with all the state assembly members and the Senate. Contact your local representation and tell them you want access to this type of medicine. That is how this happened in Washington, Oregon, Arizona, all the states where it is covered, is because there was a grassroots movement and people demanded it. And then it got passed, it got written into the legislature. It is actually written in there federally that if a doctor is licensed in a state, that it has to be covered. They're just not. There's a lot of politics involved that I'm not going to get into right now. But please do approach your representation, because that's how these things change.
Just one last thing that I wanted to mention is that we will stay in contact with you as far as email, and you have a way to contact us. We want to be here in whatever way we best can for our community right now. If there are things that you have concern about, and there's a lot of feedback that there's a request to talk more about one thing or another, and to have more events like this where we can share information, please let us know. If we get a lot of requests for one thing, that gives us a better idea of what people are actually desiring to learn about, and we can put something together for you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for the time and your energy